In this video, you will learn how to solve multiplication equations. Now, to solve a multiplication equation, we must isolate the variable by performing the inverse operation. So for example, if we had 10 times x equals 40, our goal is to isolate the variable, so to get x by itself, to figure out what is x equal to. And to do that, we perform the inverse operation. The inverse of multiplying would be dividing. So to get rid of the 10, to get x by itself, the 10 is being multiplied. So to get rid of the multiplication of the 10, we do the inverse, which is divide both sides by 10. We must divide both sides, not just the one, because we must keep the equation balanced. What you do to one side of the equation, you must also do to the other side. When we divide the left side by 10, you are left with an x over here. And then on the right side, 40 divided by 10 is 4. So our solution is x equals 4. And we can check our answer by plugging in 4 back into the equation in place of x. So instead of 10 times x equals 40, we have 10 times 4 equals 40. And because that is a true statement, that means we have the correct solution. Next example, we are given 12n equals 48. Now remember, if there is no sign, no operation in between the number and the variable, that means that we have multiplication. So when it says 12n, what that really means is 12 times n equals 48. And to get rid of the 12 that's being multiplied with the variable, we do the inverse of multiply, which is divide. So you divide both sides by 12, and when you do that, 12 divided by 12 cancels over here. You're left with an n on the left side, and 48 divided by 12 is 4 on the right side. So we have isolated the variable and found that n equals 4. And we can double check our answer by plugging in 4 back in place of n. So instead of 12 times n, we have 12 times 4 equals 48. And that is a true statement, which means 4 is the correct answer. Next example, we have negative 6y equals 24. So again, the number in front of the variable means that we have multiplication. So what we have is really negative 6 times y equals 24. So to figure out what is y equal to, we can do the inverse of multiplying, which is divide. So we divide both sides by the negative 6 to get y by itself. When you do that on the left side, the negative 6's will cancel out. You're left with the y on the left side, and then 24 divided by negative 6, assuming you know how to multiply and divide with negative numbers, that would equal a negative 4. So our solution is negative 4. And we can double check that by plugging negative 4 back in place for y. So instead of negative 6 times y, we have negative 6 times negative 4. And negative 6 times negative 4 is equal to 24, which means that negative 4 is the correct solution. Here's another example. We have 3y equals negative 24. So again, we want to get y by itself to figure out what is y equal to. And to do that, we need to perform the opposite of multiplication, because the 3 in the front means multiplication, and the opposite of multiplication is division. So we divide both sides by 3. On the left side, this will cancel out. You're left with a y over here. And then negative 24 divided by 3 is negative 8. So our solution is y equals negative 8. And we can double check our answer by plugging in negative 8 in place of y. So instead of 3 times y, we have 3 times negative 8 equals negative 24. And that is a true statement, which means that negative 8 is the correct answer. Here is another example. We are told that negative 7 times y equals negative 42. So this one, we have two negatives, and we need to figure out what is y equal to by getting rid of this -7. This -7 is being multiplied with the y, so to remove it, we do the inverse of multiply, which is divide. So we divide both sides by -7. On the left, this will cancel. On the right, -42 divided by -7. Two negatives divided with each other make a positive number. So that gives you a positive 6 on the right. So our solution is y equals positive 6. And we can double check this by plugging 6 back in for y into the original equation. We would have -7 times 6 equals -42. That is a true statement, which means that 6 was the correct answer. Here's another example where now we have a fraction. So for example 6, we have 2/3 times h. And 2/3 times h equals 6. Alright, so this one, the process is still the same, but fractions might make it look a little more complicated, but it's really not too much. Because here we have 2/3 times h. So to get rid of the multiplication, we have to do the inverse, which is divide. So again, we're just dividing both sides by 2/3. We see that typed up right here. Well, what is 2/3 divided by 2/3? Well, what's anything divided by itself? 4 divided by 4, 8 divided by 8. Anything divided by itself is 1. So this will cancel out. You have 1 times h. So you have 1h or just h. That cancels out. That's why we chose to divide by 2/3. So we have h on the left, and then 6 divided by 2/3 on the right. So this whole question boils down to what is 6 divided by 2/3? Well, 6 is the same thing as 6 over 1, and when you divide by a fraction, that is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So we can think of that as multiplying by 3 over 2. And then you can multiply the top together. 6 times 3 is 18. The bottoms, 1 times 2 is 2. 18 divided by 2 gives you 9. So your solution is h equals 9. And we can double check that by plugging back in the number 9, our solution, in place of h. So we can see if this would give you a true statement. Well, what is 2/3 times 9? Well, that's 2/3 times 9 over 1. Well, 2 times 9 is 18 on the top. 3 times 1 is 3 on the bottom. 18 divided by 3 gives you 6. That is a true statement, which means that 9 is the correct answer. Example 7, we have a decimal, and here we have 1.5 times b equals 45. So again, we can have anything in front of the variable, and the process will still be the same, whether it be a fraction, a whole number, negative number, could be a decimal. The steps are still the same, where to get the variable by itself, to isolate it, we do the inverse operation. And here we have 1.5 times b. So to get rid of the multiplication of the 1.5, we do the inverse operation, which is we divide. So we divide both sides by 1.5, and when you do that, you can get this to cancel. You have b on the left, and then 45 divided by 1.5 on the right. Now when you divide, you need to make sure there's no decimal in the divisor. So we can multiply top and bottom by 10, which has the effect of moving the decimal point over one place. So now we have 450 divided by 15. Well, 45 divided by 15, right here, that's 3, and then just put a 0 at the end to get 30. So your solution is b equals 30. And we can double check our answer by plugging the 30 back in to b into the equation. So now we have 1.5 times 30 equals 45. Now the question is this a true statement? So you multiply 1.5 times 30. So to do that, we can put a 0 here at the end, and then do the 3 times 5 to get 15. Take the 5, carry the 1. 3 times 1 plus 1 is 4. So we have 450, and then move the decimal point one place to the left, because there's one digit here after the point. And that gives you 45, which is the answer we had. All right, so that makes a true statement, which means that 30 is the correct answer. One more example. We have example 8, where we have negative y equals 6. This one looks kind of weird, but it might be helpful if you remember that if there is nothing written in front of the variable, there is an assumed 1. So we can think of this as negative 1y, or in other words, negative 1 times y. All right, so here this is an actual multiplication problem, a multiplication equation, where to solve this, we must remove the negative 1 by dividing. So we can divide both sides by negative 1. When you do that, this would cancel. 6 divided by negative 1 on the right side would give you a negative 6. So your solution is y equals negative 6. And now if we want, we can check our answer by plugging back into the original equation, negative y equals 6, or you can even think of it as, negative 1 times, and then here, instead of the y, we have negative 6. So negative 1 times negative 6 equals 6. That is a true statement, which means we do have the correct answer. So y equals negative 6. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.